Good morning, everyone, and we are happy you are here. Hello, my name is Derek Clifford. I am the founder and CEO of Elevate Equity, and hope you guys are off to having a fantastic weekend. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we have a very exciting and interesting topic that is essential for all real estate investors. It's called selecting your criteria. This is one of the first fundamental things that most successful real estate investors do when looking at trying to identify property to take on, okay? And I think the first thing you got to do is start thinking about your criteria when you're learning about real estate investing in general or looking to invest. You got to prioritize what's important to you. And this is kind of the process of breaking that all down. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to start with when to start thinking about criteria, what active investors should select from or think about when selecting their criteria, and then what passive investors can do. And then after that, we'll talk about selecting which ones to prioritize depending on what your situation is. So first question is, when do you start thinking about criteria? And the answer to that is right now. That's the most important thing that you can do for yourself, is to narrow your focus down so that you're focusing on specific things that are important to you and what you're trying to achieve by investing in real estate, okay? So after you're doing some preliminary research, understanding what type of investing you want to get into and which way you want to go, narrowing down how to get there, this is that process, okay? So doing the preliminary research while you're thinking about this, you're saying, okay, what will work for me, what won't? This is where you got to start thinking about it, okay? So this is a really important topic. And of course, as I mentioned before, this depends on whether or not you're an active investor or a passive investor. So let's go ahead and break out some of the differences, okay? Now, the first thing that we want to talk about is we want to talk about what active investors do, because active investors, they have a different kind of strategy than passive investors. Passive investors, they look at different things, and so we're going to talk about what active investors want. And so by active investor, I mean people that are doing single family homes or small multifamily, or trying to do some sort of joint venture or partnering up with someone to take on a multifamily property, okay? So there's a lot of different factors, but the one that I usually like to start with is the market and the major metro service area that you're looking at. That's really, really important, because that's going to tell you where it is that you want to focus your effort in. Because there's a big world out there, and there's a lot of properties and a lot of different states to invest in, but generally narrowing down by a certain market or metro service area helps you organize your thoughts. I mean, you can think nationally too, like that's one thing you can do, but generally the people that you're going to work with are local to each individual market and area. So that's something you got to give some extra thought. You got to make sure that you're realizing some synergies by working with the same people in the same market over and over again that are happy working with you. So that's a really important thing, is that thinking about things in terms of which market to go into. Okay, so that's one criteria. The next is purchase price. So next you want to look at, all right, what can I actually afford? So this is pretty straightforward, but if it's going to be something where your purchase price is $1 million and you only have like 50,000 to invest in real estate, that's probably not the right market for you. So you got to kind of look at that and weigh out the pros and cons. Okay. The next, which is a really important one, is either the rental rates or the ratio of rental rate versus purchase price. And this is a really important one, maybe not as important as the market or purchase price, at least in my mind. It depends on what your goals are. But getting a feeling for how profitable your investment is going to be is really, really important. And so you got to look at whether or not, you know, the rents that you're going to be getting for the dollars that you're going to put out to get that property is worth your while. So that's one thing there. And then another criteria is type. Like, are you going to talk about, like, all right, are you looking for single family homes or duplexes or triplexes? Is there something you're trying to achieve in your overall portfolio? And this is something that really a lot of people can't tell you, except you, whether or not this is right for you or not. So it takes some searching and trying to understand what type of property is correct for you. And that's another criteria. The next one is neighborhood, or the class of the property. Sometimes people are willing to take on more risk to go in neighborhoods that most people wouldn't want to go into. So you can buy properties for a lot cheaper, and the rents are also lower, but the ratio between the rents you receive versus the purchase price plus any kind of rehab or construction work is generally in your favor. But the problem is that not a lot of investors want to go there. So The exit strategies are hard. It's hard to get out of the property. So are you willing to hold on, right? And so the neighborhood is really kind of one of those things you got to look at. And sometimes a good way is pick a major service area and pick individual neighborhoods that kind of meet your criteria. So, or meet your investing goals by looking at some of the other criteria. So you can just narrow down that in your investment search and say, all right, I'm looking for something in this spot, and I'm looking for something in this spot, in that part of town. That's going to help narrow your focus so that it's easier to identify opportunities as they come up faster. Okay. And then the other thing is class. So there are different classes of properties. There's A class, B class, C class, D class. And as you might imagine, D classes are kind of like war zone areas where the returns are really high, but it's very risky. And then the A classes are more like luxury, like downtown. And these are great properties to own, but super expensive. And it may not even lend itself to any strategy or yours to be able to buy those things and then not collect very much return at all. So you kind of got to weigh out where you want to be on that spectrum. And then B and C are kind of like in the middle there, leaning towards one way or the other. And B and C is kind of where I personally like to invest. I like to be in those specific areas. Okay. And then another thing you should consider is funding source. All right, where is the money coming from? Because if you're going to be investing in a multifamily apartment, let's say you have an IRA or you have some retirement money that you want to deploy, there are certain things you got to be aware of when you're investing with the IRA. If you're investing with an IRA, then probably you're not going to want to take advantage of depreciation. So whatever properties you buy, you may not need to worry about depreciation. So you kind of like eliminate those properties that just aren't important. And you got other things to consider too, like are you going to be purchasing outright cash? Or are you going to be putting leverage on the property? Sometimes if you're planning on going into a war zone and you want to leverage your money, well, unfortunately, sometimes the appraisals may not come back in your favor, so you may not be able to purchase in those areas. So one thing to consider is your funding source. So make sure that you're understanding where you can and can't go with all your other criteria in addition to this funding source. And then the last but really most important strategy is what are you going to do is strategy. So how are you going to approach your acquisition? Are you going to do a turnkey? Are you going to do a buy and hold? Are you going to go in and try to like do a BRRRR, which is a buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat? Or are you going to go in there and just flip a property, right? You're not going to own or have any tenant management there. Those things all affect like what type of property you're going to look for, because you may see a property in a neighborhood, right? One property is already like it's in the same neighborhood as one criteria, and the price is really low, but there's a huge rehab and lots of risk in it. And then right next to it is a really great property that's already turnkey and maybe already has tenants in there. They're in the same neighborhood on the same street. The pricing may be different, but maybe not the rent to price ratio for after you finish going all in. So what's worth it to you? Which one of these do you want to look at? So all of those criteria, right? Everything that we said. So I'm going to go through it again. It's market, metro service area, purchase price, rent rates, or the rental rate versus purchase price ratio, the type, if it's a single family duplex, triplex, the neighborhood, the class, the funding source, and your strategy. All of those things are really important criteria. And all of those, you have to determine which one of those is right for you. Okay. That's for active investors. And just after this section, we'll talk about selecting which one you are, because I want to cover some of the passive invested stuff first before going on to selecting criteria. So the next part of this is passive investor criteria. So for passive investors, they have a different set of challenges. Passive investors are not really looking to get into the weeds. They don't want to, go in there and acquire properties. They just want to make sure that their money is secure, it's creating a good return on their investment, and that they're going to be able to multiply or grow that wealth later on. And it's in a safe place. It's with someone they trust. So one of the most important things that you can vet out, you always start with the operator. Do you know the operator? How much experience do they have working in the market where the property is located? What's their reputation? Have you talked with other investors who have worked with that operator? Those are really important things to consider, because these operators are really what makes a property sink or swim. So it's really important for you to vet that out. And that's obviously one of the most important things. And everyone always goes to that anyway, because usually whenever a passive investment comes up, there's always a face tied to that passive investment. And so you're going to be starting by talking with the operator and getting to know them a little bit. But I'm imploring you to explore their experience and their resume even more and really get to know them well, okay? Because that's going to be really important. That's the number one factor that helps decide whether or not an investment is going to go well, is the investor's reputation and their experience level, okay? So second criteria for passive investing is maybe the property and which market you're going to be in. If the property is in an area where maybe off in the middle of nowhere or may not have much growth, perspective, I still think that having a good operator will help you overcome some of those difficulties. But still, if you feel kind of like, I don't know if I believe in this, or I think there's something going on with that market, that's something to consider, right? Because sometimes, as someone who lives on the West Coast or, in the Midwest, you may not want to invest like out east or something, just because you have no familiarity, you have no connection with the area. There's no reason for you to be wanting to go into that property. But there's there's various reasons and causes for why you may not want to go and invest in that particular property and that particular market. So that's one criteria. And then the last thing that you have, which is significantly less than active, is you have returns, business strategy, and risk for how the syndication or the apartment or the passive investment operates. You got to also look at, like, okay, what is the lead syndicator saying the returns are going to be like? And you have to keep in mind that it's really easy for operators to just put something down on paper and say, yeah, we're going to make 25% IRR, or we're going to have like 10% cash right out of the gate. But how much do you actually trust that? Is this operator someone you've heard of before, or are they just trying to get like a cash grab and just trying to take your money and then move on to the next person? So you got to be really careful for what people put down in returns. While it is good, like a measure for what their business plan is, I still think that looking at the operators is really important. And then in terms of business strategy, what are they going to do? Are they going to go in there and just hold the property and wait for the market to appreciate so the rents go up with the market? Or are they going to go in there with some sort of value add? In addition to that, are they going to go in there and maybe refinance in year 2 or 3 and return back money to you? Or are they just going to keep it into the property and then have a huge heyday or huge back end so that they can pay you back all of your money towards the 3 to 5 year or the end of the hold? And then also there's risk too. So, if you know that this property is in bad shape and it's going to take a while before you collect any type of cash flow at all in year 1, that's something for you to consider in terms of your criteria and what it is that you want, right? Because the business plan for what the operator puts together is also important, and it depends on whether or not it fits into your strategy or it doesn't. So that's really important. Now, we've covered when to start thinking about criteria. We've covered what active investors should be looking at, and then we've also covered what passive investors should be looking at. Let's talk about selecting your criteria. When you're selecting your criteria, you've got a couple of things to look at. I think that from the beginning, there's no real way to do this. This is more of an art than a science. But I would say that looking at what it is you're trying to accomplish as a goal, and really thinking about like what's the lead domino, like what's really important. So for me, when I started investing, like one huge thing that I wanted was cash flow. I wanted to make sure that my money that I put out there was working hard. So when I was looking for properties, I wanted to make sure my dollar was getting a lot in rent. I wasn't necessarily looking too much at appreciation, although that was there for me, but that wasn't really something I was really looking at. I really wanted to get some passive income coming in. So what I did was I said, okay, where can I achieve a favorable rent to purchase ratio in the US market? And so that's kind of where I started. That was my number one criteria. And then I was able to narrow down which metro area I was in, which ended up being Indianapolis in my case. And then I started working on, okay, what can I afford, which is purchase price. So there we go. I have the 3 criteria, which is my purchase price, the rent to price ratio, and then the market or neighborhood. So I took all of those criteria and I was able to hand that over to people who knew what they were doing. And that helped get my investment business going, because once the brokers and agents and wholesalers understand what it is that you're looking for, they can very easily deliver that value to you because they understand what it is that you're looking for and what you would like to purchase. So that's really important. So again, try to figure out like what's really important to you and what fits into your overall investing strategy, and what's the smoking gun. What one thing, if you were to focus on your criteria, would take care of many of the other things. So for me, it was purchase price. Obviously, I couldn't afford a $700,000 property to invest in. So I needed to look for things that were more in like, the $100,000 to $50,000 per house. at least when I was starting out on the active side. And then on the passive side, making sure that you understand, I highly recommend that the operator is the number one thing, and then looking at the business strategy and then looking at the market and the property itself and making sure you understand what type of risk you're taking. Those are also important on the passive side, but definitely less due diligence and less thought needs to go into the passive side than it does on the active. The active will take work and it gets refined, and obviously you're going to get more and more into the details, and your team, you'll be able to like work with them to help narrow down and add more criteria as soon as they know what you're looking for. So I think it's really important to start thinking about all those things. Okay, so that is selecting your investment criteria. I hope that you guys enjoyed this and you got some good information out of it. And so if you like this, please like and subscribe. Please comment as well and engage with us, because we want to hear more about what you think about all of our stuff. And so if you want to find out more about what we do, check us out on our website, which is elevateequity.org, or click the link in the description to find out more and even get a free ebook that talks about the 7 ways in which passive investing helps build your wealth and preserve it. That's something that's really, really important to us, and we want to help impress that upon all of our investors and everyone out there, that there is another way to escape the W-2 rat race, even if you're married or if you're single. So that being said, you guys, I will end the stream now. So thank you guys for watching, and we hope to see you sometime around. And please reach out if you have any questions. We are here for you. And with that, I'll go ahead and end the stream. Take care, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend.